Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. The story of the Manson family murders has been told countless times in film, TV, and books, but rarely has the focus been on the women of the Manson family, even though the majority of the family were actually women. Well, leave it to the great Mary Harron, known for her explorations of damaged men like American Psycho, as well as stories of women hunting for a space of their own like I Shot Andy Warhol, to focus on the pathologies of the girls that were drawn to Manson. In her new film, Charlie says Harron and her co-writer Guinevere Turner let the women incarcerated speak for themselves. Let's take a look.
I know everyone thinks we're these scary creatures who committed these horrible crimes, but we did what we had to do.
I need your help with the Manson girls over in the Special Security Unit.
Good morning, ladies. I'd like you to meet Carleen Faith.
Hi, Carleen.
What is it you can really do for them?
I just want to remind them of who they were before they ever met Charles Manson.
It's like being home again. The family before the crimes, when everything was about love.
What do we have here?
I'm Leslie.
I think we should let her stay.
You're gonna be Lulu.
We don't talk about our pasts. Our lives started when we met Charlie.
We're all about love here. We got no secrets. We got no shame. Sometimes there has to be some death of self, changes, tears. Or are you willing to die for me? I want to go on an adventure.
Hello. Do I know you?
Get ready to fight.
And if I die, will you come?
Charlie taught us that death and life are the same thing, so there's nothing to be afraid of.
Do you love me?
Thrust and jab like you mean it. Thrust, jab.
We wanted to believe something big was gonna happen.
So baby, run. If you care for me.
We're gonna go out and we're gonna get it right.
There are real victims in this prison.
Maybe these women are victims too.
The time is now, man.
We did what we had to do. Right?
So baby, run.
Everybody, please welcome from Charlie Says, Marianne Rendon, Hannah Murray, writer Guinevere Turner, and director Mary Harron. Let's hear it. Hi, thank you so much for being here. I'm such a big fan of your work, going back to I Shot Andy Warhol, all the way up through all of it. What made you, as I said in the intro, the Manson family story has been told at this point countless times. There are clearly the iconic tellings of it that we'll never forget, the book Helter Skelter. But what was it that made you want to, I know you wrote the script, what made you want to go back to this well?
I think simply because no one had told the story from the perspective of the women, and in particular, understanding them as individuals, understanding them as having their own paths, understanding them as not crazy people that we don't connect with, understanding them as people who we potentially could be given the right set of circumstances.
And you have a personal stake in telling this story. I just read a piece that you wrote for The New Yorker about growing up in what would be deemed as a cult, nothing violent like this at all. Was that something that drew you to writing this as well?
Absolutely. The way that I grew up, I think, doubly made me want to tell this story, just because it's familiar ground to me on some very kind of basic and mundane levels about growing up, the sort of day-to-day of it, and the sort of non-sensational kind of way that you live when you live in a group of people. Absolutely influenced sort of the sort of subtle texture of some of the scenes in the movie.
How does approaching the Manson story from a non-sensationalistic way affect you as creators when your audience going into a Manson story maybe expects or wants some of that sensationalism, but clearly the two of you are much more interested in different, more subtle nuances about the story?
Well, I think that was the whole purpose for us. the image that I had before I read Guinevere's script and before I started working on this, you have iconic images of the girls at their trial when they're the zombie Manson girls, and they're in these crazy, mod hippie outfits, and they're smiling in a way that seems very inappropriate for a gruesome trial. And then you realize that what was behind that, no, they're real people. Those were just, those frozen moments were what Charlie had asked them to do. Charlie says, dress up and go smile for the cameras. And then, so I think what fascinated me about the script was how did they get there? And how did sort of perfectly sane people go from kind of normal people joining what they thought was a sort of love-based commune to being told by their leader, go and kill people, and going to do it. So, what's the journey? That seemed to me the most important thing to understand was how they got there psychologically.
I think one of the most important lines in the film, obviously no one has seen, I don't want to spoil anything, is one of your lines, Marianne, where you say, forgive me for paraphrasing your great writing and your great performance, but something along the lines of like, every man you love hits you, or making love to your man is the same as getting hit by them, which is that these characters are in search for this escape from maybe from a society that is run by men, run by a patriarchy, but still find them sort of succumbing to this sort of smaller version of that is maybe just as violent as the one that they were trying to escape.
Yeah, I mean, it was horrific, the amount of abuse, sexual and physical and emotional and mental that went on in that family. I think for Susan specifically, she was someone who had a deep need for belonging and for a family and for someone to love her. And so she accepted, unfortunately, in that scene, the end of that scene, that kind of attention as attention at all. And you get to witness very real domestic violence that occurs.
Yeah. Hannah, what attracted to you to playing one of the quote unquote Manson girls?
I don't know. I had a really strong feeling when I read the script that somehow this was mine and I was supposed to do it. And I think obviously the fact that Mary and Guinevere were involved it made it like a no-brainer to want to be involved. But I think I'm interested in testing the limits of my empathy and seeing how far I can stretch that, because I think it's the kind of most important thing we do as actors and probably the most important thing we can do as human beings. And so to sit with this character and try and understand her and ask why, when I think I might not have instinctively wanted to go to that place of trying to empathize with her, that felt like a very important sort of human act for me.
So when you come to a moment in the film or in shooting the end, one of the final scenes of the film, this like horrific image of your face with blood getting splattered across it, are you thinking about how you can justify that for that character or how you can empathize with them in that moment?
I don't know if I would use the word justify, but I do think I was interested in, as Mary was saying just now, how someone can go to that place. And I think it's important not to judge people so harshly that you think that could never be me. And I think, as Guinevere said just now, it's like under the right set of circumstances, or maybe the wrong set of circumstances, I think this could have happened to a lot of young women.
When you're dealing with writing Charlie Manson as a character, as a person in a movie, he's obviously, again, been written about so many times. There's been multiple performances. What are you thinking about trying to do something different, or are you thinking about trying to do something as honest or as real as you read about it?
To me, one of the biggest projects in representing him was demystifying him and not making him this sort of larger than life or literal kind of supernatural, most evil man ever in the history of America kind of guy, but more sort of, again, to contextualize him as a kind of low-level con man, also, behaving in pimp-like structures and in the structures of domestic violence in order to manipulate people.
Yeah, I would say more so than in any depiction I've ever seen of him. Your writing, your direction, and Matt Smith all present him as much more logical in a way. He's usually portrayed as someone who's crazy and kooky and says wild things, and he just sort of comes off, as you said, it's like a mystical creature, someone that's totally insane, rather than what he was, which is sort of like a born con man and violent manipulator.
Yeah, and also he was a loser who got lucky by wandering into Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco at a time when there was a horde of young people whose brains had been kind of rearranged on drugs, and they were looking for someone to give them direction and meaning. And he had a real gift for manipulation, and he was all too happy to be that person. When I was directing Matt, I said, all the footage, almost all the footage that's available is stuff of him after the murders, after the trial, when he's performing for the camera.
Manipulating the media.
Yes, it's a performance of him being all wild and crazy. So don't take that as your sort of template for the performance. We've got to find the person he was before those camera performances.
Yeah, the closest thing that we get to a sort of classic Charlie moment is when Hannah's character first meets him, and he does the kind of like mirror me, but from then on out, he's just a straight up abusive, manipulative husband manipulating these women.
Yeah, because it's called The Family, and it's kind of a classic abusive family where everyone sort of supports each other and tries to turn a blind eye to the abuse, and what he says goes, and all his crazy arbitrary rules, and everyone's just almost like complicit in their own abuse a bit.
How many films have the two of you made together now at this point?
This is number 3.
Number 3.
We've
This is
written
number
a
3.
4th one. Yeah.
Is number 4 coming soon?
Oh, yeah?
Well, not soon, a couple years.
It's ready.
Well, we'll see. Do you find that your body of work, Mary, your body of work and your body of work together have consistent themes or patterns or things that you're interested in exploring?
Maybe pariah characters. I think I have.
I don't know why I think that's so funny. I'm sorry.
No, I think it is. I mean, and I'm only saying this after the event, maybe because other people have said it. But I am interested in outsiders and people that other people don't have much sympathy for.
Extremities as well, or like
Yeah.
people going to extremes in
People
some
going
way.
through extremes, and also somebody said that all my films are about somebody who thinks they found the center of the world. They think they found the party, the great place, and then it all goes wrong. And I think this one is no exception, really.
Guinevere?
And also, in the case of Manson and in the case of Betty Page, for example, and for Mary, for Valerie Solanas, it's about these people who have been seen in this one very specific way and kind of looking at it with a contemporary eye, with a more complex eye, with a non-judgmental eye, and with a, how could this be me or how can I connect with this person? Not de-othering them, if you will.
Yeah, and I think you also do that with the girls of the Manson family in this, where in other portrayals, there's so many corrections in this film, I think, at least correcting previous portrayals, which is that usually they are just sort of slack-jawed, doe-eyed, and high, and he's kind of leading them around, where in this, we're actually seeing a fair amount of the confusion, a fair amount of the loss that they're feeling as they're committing these actions or are about to do them. Can you talk about previous portrayals that you saw in working with Mary, and these moments where your characters are about to do something horrific or are realizing what's happening around them?
I don't think have you seen any previous
I didn't see any.
Yeah, I haven't seen any previous portrayals that I was kind of reacting against or comparing with. I think someone said something about Leslie in this movie that there's always a moment where you see her consider that it's always that there's so many moments where you see her almost maybe step away from this, or it seems like maybe too much, or she's doubting it, or she's assessing it. There's an incremental journey of accepting this mistreatment.
Well, even in her,
she completely gives away her power and does this terrible, terrible thing.
even in her moment where she says goodbye to her family, she does not look particularly pleased about doing that, or as if she's 100% confident in that moment.
Yeah, and I think that level of conflict within a character is really, really interesting to play. That there's always two things going on for her. I think in any given moment, she's not cut and dried. She's not one-dimensional. She's a fully three-dimensional, thinking, breathing human who made terrible, terrible mistakes.
I think one of my favorite sequences of the film is when Charlie performs for the record executive who he's trying to sell his music to. I've actually always kind of liked Charlie Manson's bootleg music. It's so bad and outsider artisty. But what I love about that scene is that for the first time we're seeing that scene from the perspective of the women who have to perform for this record executive and have to objectify themselves in the same way that women were objectified from the society that they were trying to escape. Marianne, you were kind of the key into that scene. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, Mary and I discussed that before we started shooting about Susan's life before she was with Charlie and the family. She was living in Haight-Ashbury and was a exotic dancer for Anton LaVey, who was the head of the Satanists at the time. So she had...
Was she really?
Yeah, she was. So she had... Yeah, it's kind of cool. She had a really dark, sad past. She dropped out of high school when she was very young. Her mother died when she was a teenager. Her father was an alcoholic. So she was entirely on her own at a very young age. And she had already had a run-in with the law before she'd even met Charlie. So it was important for Mary and I to discuss what kind of physical vocabulary she would work with in terms of like having had the experience of go-go dancing in that time of the 60s. And so, yeah.
Very like naughty girl group.
Yeah. I think you watched some videos. Marianne and Kaylee Card. I think
we choreographed that dance.
Yeah, which I love.
I mostly did.
Because it's a mixture of sort of go-go dancing and hippie dancing. It's like so.
It's this weird, strange, sort of sad, dark striptease.
What I love about your character, and it makes so much sense now in your portrayal, now that you say that she was sort of part of another cult prior to even being with Manson. I mean, she was a dancer with Anton LaVey, who was kind of his own cult leader in a certain way. Is that at this point, she's given herself over to whatever the Manson family is, no matter what its horrors are for her.
Yeah, like I said, I think they were all looking for belonging and some kind of community and some kind of home that was embracing the counterculture that they were trying to escape from. And you see in the film, there are elements of it that were quite blissful and quite idyllic.
Yeah, I think whereas Leslie, we see optimism and a conflict in her eyes, but a lot of optimism about what's happening. You've been there for a little bit longer.
Yeah, you see that in the contrast between the three of them. I think Susan definitely had a lot more experience. She was a little bit more jaded about things, whereas Leslie was just coming out of her family home.
Yeah. Can you talk about the writing that girl group scene as well? Because that to me felt like when I was watching film, such a key to what the film was about and what it was trying to say about this period of time, which rarely gets said.
Well, it's sort of an allegory, really, for the fact that they were also available sexually to whatever man came to visit, but that also what's in there was on the page and certainly is in the performance and direction is that they would do anything for him. Mm-hmm. They were really, even though he's yelling at them and saying one of my favorite ad-lib lines ever, which I'm not sure if I can say right now.
You can say.
I don't care about your opinion. I'm just here for your titties and your shapes. Oh, yeah. That's 100% Matt Smith in the moment. Which I commend the actors for not cracking up because it's just, I was like, whoa, okay. Just showing that they were just really, really, really wanted to please him and really, really wanted what he wanted more than anything, which was a record deal.
And I think what's great is that they're still.
It was a record deal.
Yeah, no.
Sorry,
like many monsters, he's a failed artist, and if he could have had a minor pop hit or two. If only he had got that record contract, history would be different. But the girls are so still believing in him, and what I think is great about the moment is that in Charlie you see this complete shame and humiliation and sort of beginning rage. That he stakes so much on this moment, and the sort of contempt, like you see Hollywood royalties come to visit these scruffy hippies, and you see a certain sort of contempt from the producer as he watches these kids perform.
Right, it's like his friend's thing, and he thinks they're probably kind of gross for even doing it, but he's doing them a favor. Yeah. And the abuse probably didn't start after that, but your depiction of the abuse essentially is the following scene, correct?
But actually, a number of people have said that after Terry Melcher came in that failed audition, everything got much darker, and you can almost draw a line before and after.
Right. Once he realized he wasn't going to be the next Beatles or whatever he thought he was
Yeah.
going to be. He
Yeah.
went completely insane. Matt Smith is not doing an American Psycho-like performance, but it does feel like an extension or a continuation or your interest in men at the extreme, and you just giggling at the idea of it just a second ago made me think that you get a certain amount of entertainment out of watching
Well,
this.
what I really loved, what I loved about Matt's performance, also true of Christian's performance, is that they got the essential insecurity in both those characters. I mean, Patrick Bateman's supposed to be a monster, and Charles Manson is a famous real-life monster, but they were also very touchy and insecure and vain and easily, and one of the reasons why they would get angry is because they are so insecure. And so I felt that really humanizes and brings it down to earth, the portrayal.
Which is, creates an almost kind of, and there isn't as nearly as much comedy in this as there is in American Psycho, but that can create a kind of comic portrayal when you have someone who's so arrogant and so confident and trying to lead everybody, yet is so touchy and insecure and easily offended.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were you able to? I'm sorry. Was the woman who did she write the book The Family? Excuse me for forgetting.
Carlene Faith. No, she wrote the book called The Long Prison Journey of Leslie Van Houten.
Right.
It's played by Merritt Weaver in the movie.
Right, and she passed away a couple of years ago, right?
May of 2017.
Did you work with her at all prior to on the script or anything like that, or meet with her?
I didn't work on the script with her. I very much gained her trust, which took a lot because she wrote that book. A lot of people wanted to talk to her about the Manson girls, and she was just not interested in anything but helping Leslie get parole. But eventually, I gained her trust, and I spent hours with her on the phone, and then eventually visited her and became friends with her. And when I finished the first draft, I said, "Carlene, do you want to read it?" And she said, "Oh, I know myself. I'm just going to tell you all the factual things that are wrong. But I also know how movies work, so I'm going to just trust you, and please bring me to the premiere."
When she said she knows how movies work, but she's going to tell you all the facts that are wrong, is that her basically saying, I know that you have to take at least some poetic license to tell the story?
Yeah, but yeah.
Good for her.
Yeah, and
That's
great restraint on her part because she knew.
But even you say in the credit, she said that she wanted it to be very clear that the movie was made without the help of the three women in prison.
Right, and that's for a very concrete reason. If you're up for parole at all and you're perceived of having a connection to anything that aggrandizes or makes, rehashes your crime, it's just terrible for parole. So it's up there specifically so someone can point to it on a parole board at a parole board hearing and say they had nothing to do with this.
How do you feel about, do you think they should be paroled? Not that you're a parole officer.
I mean, I think the movie probably gives the answer to that away. I do feel like what exactly happens to them, I don't know, but I do feel like they are owed the same level of forgiveness of people who've committed similar crimes who have long since been out of prison.
Right, at this point, they're not in prison for the crimes themselves. They're in prison for the infamy of the crime.
Because nobody wants to be the one to say, okay, sure, you can go out, because that's a political thing. Please, Gavin Newsom.
I think we have time for a couple questions from the audience. Who has a question? Right here.
These won't be Game of Thrones questions, so you don't have to worry about that. But I ask this question of my students often. I'm a psychology professor. How, by doing these roles, if at all, did it give you any insight into what led these young girls, adolescents as well as young women, into this type of a situation, since they came from varied backgrounds, from very impoverished ones to questionable, problematic ones, to one being homecoming queen?
Yeah, like I said earlier, I think it comes from a great need to belong and be accepted, and being raised in Susan's particular circumstances, the way that she was, she didn't have a strong ability to make decisions for herself. I think that I think that that need for belonging is a really basic human emotion, and I think it can be twisted and manipulated, and I think, and we see in this case what a dark place it took these women to. That was the strongest insight I felt from making the film, was how desperate they were for that feeling of belonging to something bigger than themselves.
And I would say it's important to remember that none of these kids in the Manson family if someone had said to them, join this family, and in a year and a half, you're going in the middle of the night to somebody's house and kill perfect strangers, none of them would have joined if they'd known or had any idea of how it would end up. It was a real incremental, step-by-step process of becoming a sort of group mind, of coming under Charlie's sway, of paranoia, of isolation, of a lot of drugs, of many factors.
But I'll ask your Game of Thrones question for you if you want. Did you watch the show on Sunday night, and how was the brightness on your TV?
Marianne watched it.
Was it too dark?
I loved it. I keep saying this.
It was beautiful.
I loved it.
Oscuro.
I was crazy about it. I loved it. What are they talking about? Yeah, it's great.
That's what I think, yeah. One more question from the audience.
Hi, so I wanted to ask, I know women who work in your field, whether they be actors, writers, or directors, oftentimes they sit down with the people whom the story is based on. If Charles Manson was still alive, would you ladies be willing to sit down and speak to him?
No.
No.
He was, and I didn't want to.
No, because he would only lie. You know, everything he ever said, you know, from prison was a performance and nothing was true. And it's almost like there's no there. You know, there's almost no, who is he? It's almost like there's a void at the center. So no.
It's almost like he tells lies because it's the first thing his brain tells him to do.
Yeah.
And then he has to tell lies to cover up those lies.
Yeah,
And
and
then
he would play
He
games.
just happens to be in jail and not the president.
And in my research, I watched endless videos of him because, you know, he would basically was known to, he would say yes to any camera that wanted to come to prison and visit him. And I went from like thinking it was funny because he talks so much gibberish to kind of being annoyed, like, God, I wish this guy would shut up. But then I'm like, this is what I need to push past to represent him, is that part where you're just exhausted. And then I was like, this guy is getting under my skin. So there's no way, I had had enough. There's no way I'd want to meet him in person.
Were you able to find any good footage of him prior to going to prison? Is there footage around of him like with the family or anything?
Not that I know of.
No.
Congratulations on the film. I think it's one of the best depictions of the Manson family, if not the best. It's at least the most different and the most sympathetic towards the people who were, I don't want to say the real victims of his crimes, but some of the real victims of his crimes. Congratulations. The film is called Charlie Says, and I believe it's premiering at the Tribeca Film Festival, correct?
Yeah.
Tonight?
Tonight. Everybody give them a huge round of applause. Let's hear it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.